Imagine being told, you might not live to see next year. Imagine sitting in a cold examination room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air, and a doctor, someone you've never met before this moment, says the word cancer, and suddenly, the future you thought you had evaporates, just like that. Now imagine this. While you are fighting for your life, while poison drips into your veins in the name of survival, while you are too weak to stand without gripping the wall, the two people you trust most in this entire world are making plans, not grieving you, not praying for you. Planning how to spend your money, planning how to explain your tragic passing, planning their future together, in your house, in your bed. This isn't fiction. This is what happened to Daniel. And what he did after going into remission, it didn't just change his life, it destroyed theirs. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when someone makes the catastrophic mistake of underestimating a man who has already stared death in the face and decided he is not afraid of anything anymore. Welcome to Karma Chronicles, where we bring you the most emotional, raw, and real stories of betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that makes you exhale for the first time in a very long while. If you believe that toxic people should never get away with what they do, hit that like button right now. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. We are here every single week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Today's story comes from Reddit's pro-revenge community, shared by a real man. A man who survived something that would have annihilated most people, not once but twice. Names have been changed, but what happened, every single word of it, is real. Settle in, because this one doesn't just hit different. This one stays with you. Daniel was 38 years old when his world stopped. Not slowly, not with warning. It stopped the way a car hits a wall. He had been tired for months, persistent fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to touch, night sweats that soaked through his sheets, weight dropping off without explanation, bruising on his arms from nothing he could remember. He told himself it was stress, long hours, getting older. The 10,000 reasonable explanations a person reaches for when the unreasonable one is too terrifying to consider, until he collapsed at work. One moment he was standing at his desk. The next, the floor came up to meet him. 3 weeks of testing later, blood panels, biopsies, imaging that felt endless. Daniel sat in a consultation room with a specialist he'd never met and heard 3 words that rearranged everything. Stage 3 lymphoma, aggressive. The kind of diagnosis that doesn't ease you in. It doesn't offer transitions or gentle introductions. It simply arrives, and it expects you to absorb it standing up. Daniel wasn't a reckless man. He had never been the type to gamble or cut corners or assume that things would simply work themselves out. He was careful, measured. He had built his life that way, deliberately, quietly well. He owned a modest but beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of street where people still wave from porches. He had savings, a small but growing consulting business that he had built from nothing over 8 years. Retirement accounts he had contributed to faithfully, even in the lean years. He had a wife, Emily, 8 years of marriage, a woman who had stood beside him at the altar and meant every word she said, or so he believed. She was warm, she was capable, she was the person he had built his adult life around. And he had a best friend, Mark. Mark had been in Daniel's life since the first week of college. 2 20-year-olds who bonded over terrible dining hall food and a shared ambition that neither of them could quite articulate yet. They had even launched a business together in their mid-20s. It failed spectacularly, burning through their savings in under 18 months. But they had laughed about it for years. Retold the story at dinner parties as if it were a badge of honor rather than a wound. Mark was the best man at Daniel's wedding. He gave a speech that made the entire room cry, even the ones who barely knew Daniel. He was the kind of friend who answered the phone at 2 in the morning without complaint, who showed up with food when you didn't ask, who told you the truth even when it was inconvenient, or so Daniel thought. When Daniel got the diagnosis, both of them showed up. Mark drove him to chemotherapy appointments. When Emily had meetings, he brought groceries. He sat in waiting rooms without being asked. He put his hand on Daniel's shoulder in the infusion center and said, "You're going to beat this, man. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." And Emily? Emily wept at the diagnosis. She held his hand and pressed her forehead to his. She whispered words that Daniel has said he will never forget. "I married you in sickness and in health. I am not going anywhere. Do you hear me? I am staying." Of course he believed her. Because when you are facing your own mortality, when the future you planned has been replaced by a schedule of appointments and medications and percentages, you cling to the people who say they are staying. You cling to them with everything you have. The movies get it wrong. Chemotherapy is not dramatic. It is not a montage of brave faces and tearful but cinematic moments of connection. It is not beautiful. It is slow. And it is relentless. It is losing your hair in clumps in the shower, handfuls at a time, and learning to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. It is a metallic taste in your mouth that coats everything, water, food, air, until you cannot remember what normal sensation felt like. It is bone-deep exhaustion that makes brushing your teeth feel like climbing a mountain. It is nausea that medication can dull but never quite silence. It is your body becoming a stranger to you, something that operates according to rules you no longer understand. Daniel went from being a fiercely independent man, someone who prided himself on never asking for help, to needing assistance standing up from a chair. In those months, Emily took over the finances. "So you don't have to stress about it, sweetheart. You just focus on getting better." It seemed reasonable. It seemed loving. Daniel agreed without hesitation. Mark began spending more time at the house, more than felt entirely normal, perhaps. But Daniel noticed it in the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit, peripherally, distantly, and then immediately file it away under acceptable explanations because the alternative requires energy you simply do not have. Mark was being supportive. That was what good friends did. Daniel was too consumed by the business of surviving to look any closer, and so he didn't. He trusted them both, and they were counting on exactly that. The first warning was not emotional, it was financial. Daniel had always been meticulous with money, the kind of person who reconciled accounts monthly and knew, within a few dollars, exactly what was in every account at any given time. One night, unable to sleep because of the steroids that kept his body humming at a frequency incompatible with rest, he opened his banking app on his phone. He noticed withdrawals, small at first, amounts that could be attributed to the medical costs that had genuinely begun piling up. But as he scrolled back further, the pattern became harder to rationalize. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. Several transactions labeled with vague descriptions that referenced nothing specific. When he mentioned it to Emily the next morning, carefully, gently, not accusing, just asking, she smiled, the particular smile of a woman who is prepared for this question. "Medical bills, Daniel. You know how confusing it all is. Insurance gaps, out-of-network charges. I'm handling it so you don't have to worry. Trust me." He was too exhausted to push back, too foggy from medications to construct the follow-up questions. And she was right, that medical billing was genuinely labyrinthine. He had seen enough invoices to know that. He let it go. And Mark, the one time Daniel raised it with him, delivered the same reassurance with the same calm certainty. "She's handling everything, man. Let her. Your only job right now is to get through this. Don't stress about money." So Daniel focused on not dying. He put his head down and he endured. He submitted to the nausea and the exhaustion and the indignity and the fear. He showed up to every appointment. He took every medication at every scheduled hour. He did everything he was told to do. And while he was doing that, the two people who told him to trust them were busy with an entirely different project. 3 months into treatment, Daniel's condition worsened before it improved, a common but terrifying trajectory that his oncologist had warned him about. There was language during this period about preparing for possibilities. That phrase, preparing for possibilities, seemed to change something in the house. A shift in atmosphere so subtle that Daniel, in his diminished state, could feel it without being able to name it. Emily became distant, not cruel, not overtly cold, just less present, as if she had begun the process of detachment, of mentally leaving, while her body was still technically in the room. Mark's visits became more frequent, but increasingly they happened when Daniel was asleep. He would surface from medicated rest to hear voices downstairs, low, hushed, that fell silent the moment the floorboards creaked above them. Daniel told himself it was nothing. Two people who cared about him, keeping each other company during a frightening time. One afternoon, he returned home early from a lab appointment that had ended ahead of schedule. The drive home had taken something out of him. It always did. But he had pushed through it because the house, even in his diminished relationship with it, still meant safety. The front door was unlocked. He registered it distantly, stepped inside, heard something upstairs. Laughter, not casual laughter. Not the sound of two people watching television or sharing a funny story. Something else. Something with a different frequency. He climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, each step deliberate, his heart beating hard, though whether from exertion or something he could not yet name, he wasn't sure. The bedroom door was half closed. He pushed it open, and what he saw on the other side of that door dismantled everything. Emily and Mark, in his bed, in his house. in the home he had built and paid for and fought to keep through months of illness that had stripped him of nearly everything else. For a moment, just a moment, his mind refused to accept it. He was on steroids, he had chemo brain, his perception was unreliable and he knew it. But then Mark looked up and their eyes met. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. Emily scrambled. Mark moved. Words began forming, the words people reach for when they are caught in something that has no defense, explanations and context, and this isn't what it looks like, which is always precisely what it looks like. Daniel didn't yell, he didn't cry, he didn't move from the doorway. He said very quietly, in a voice he barely recognized as his own, "How long?" Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. That silence was the confession. Emily moved out within a week, not in shame, not apologetically, not with any of the remorse that might have made what she was doing human. She left with her chin up and her eyes forward, and the last thing she said to Daniel, the man undergoing chemotherapy, the man who had held her hand through 8 years of life, was this: "I can't live like this anymore. I need to be happy." Happiness, while he was scheduling PET scans. Mark blocked his number without a word, and Daniel was alone, alone in the house he had built, alone in the life he had carefully, faithfully constructed, alone with his illness and his appointments and the particular, echoing silence of a home that used to contain people who claimed to love him. But here is the thing about a person who has already faced the real possibility of death. They stop fearing loss. Because loss, the ordinary human devastating loss of relationships and trust in the future you imagined, is survivable. Daniel already knew what unsurvivable looked like. He had sat across from it in a consultation room and been handed a pamphlet. This was survivable. And that clarity, that cold, precise, unshakable clarity, is a very particular kind of dangerous. 2 weeks after Emily left, Daniel received an envelope in the mail. No return address inside, printed screenshots, bank transfer records, message threads, photographs. The sender was Mark's ex-girlfriend. A woman Daniel had met perhaps 3 times in his life, someone who existed at the very edge of his social world. She had discovered her own version of the betrayal, and she was not interested in being silent about it. Daniel sat at his kitchen table and read what she had sent him, and the betrayal he thought he understood became something else entirely. Emily and Mark had not simply been having an affair, they had been planning for his death, not as a feared possibility, but as a preferred outcome. Message threads discussed moving into Daniel's house after the inevitable. They had calculated the life insurance payout. They had researched what the house would sell for in the current market. They had talked about how to explain their relationship to mutual friends after a suitable period of mourning. And then Daniel read a specific message from Mark, the man who had sat beside him in the infusion center and told him, "I've got you, man." And it said this: "Honestly, if he doesn't make it through this round, we're set. The house alone is worth $500,000. Emily's response was a heart emoji. Another thread detailed the financial transfers, the ones Emily had attributed to insurance gaps and medical billing. Money moved from their joint account into a shell company registered under Mark's name, categorized as consulting fees. Over $120,000, Daniel's emergency fund, his retirement savings, the money he had spent years accumulating, one disciplined deposit at a time. They hadn't just been waiting for him to die. They had been profiting from his suffering while he was still alive. Daniel sat with those screenshots for a long time. The room was very quiet. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, he didn't call anyone. He felt something settle into the center of his chest, cold and clear and absolute resolve. 3 weeks after the envelope arrived, Daniel received a phone call from his oncologist. The scan results were in. The tumors had shrunk dramatically. The treatment was working. The trajectory had shifted. He was not cured, not yet, not definitively, but the word his doctor used was one he had not allowed himself to hope for: remission. Daniel sat in his car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes after that call, and then he drove home, because he had work to do. They had planned for a timeline that no longer existed. They had built their entire strategy around a man who was supposed to be gone, and instead that man was sitting in his car in a hospital parking lot with 6 more months of treatment ahead of him, and time. The one thing they had not accounted for. Time to prepare. Step 1, documentation. Daniel hired a forensic accountant, quietly, the kind of professional who can reconstruct a financial crime from bank statements and transfer records and invoice chains, and produce a report that would hold up in front of a judge. Every transfer, every suspicious invoice, every payment to Mark's shell company that had been labeled consulting fees for services that were never rendered, every dollar that had left Daniel's accounts during the months when he was too ill to monitor them. The forensic accountant's report was devastating. Fraud, embezzlement, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, documented, quantified, undenied. Step 2. Legal leverage. Daniel engaged an attorney who specialized in financial crimes, someone who reviewed the forensic report, the screenshots from the envelope, the documented message threads, and said very clearly, "This is one of the most complete cases I've seen." They documented themselves. His will was updated, Emily removed entirely, beneficiaries changed, assets transferred into a protected trust that no divorce proceeding could touch. He wasn't just recovering, he was restructuring. Step 3. Strategic patience. Mark owned a small construction company, family-oriented branding. Their slogan, "And this detail matters," was built on trust. Daniel watched. He monitored business announcements, public filings, local news coverage of contracts. He waited with the particular patience of a man who understands that timing is everything. Mark secured the largest contract of his company's existence, a multi-million-dollar commercial renovation project. The announcement went out, press coverage. The company's profile suddenly elevated. Mark's name in local business sections. Daniel waited until the ink was dry on that contract, and then he filed. The civil lawsuit was public record. The charges were detailed and thoroughly documented. Attached were message screenshots, including the one where Mark had written, "If he doesn't make it through this round, we're set." Local news picked up the story within 48 hours. The headline was devastating in its simplicity. Local business owner accused of exploiting terminally ill friend. Clients pulled out. Investors panicked. The commercial renovation contract, the one that was supposed to be Mark's breakthrough, dissolved. Subcontractors distanced themselves. The phone stopped ringing. Within 2 months, Mark's company was insolvent, bankrupt. Meanwhile, Emily had returned to work during Daniel's illness at a healthcare nonprofit, public-facing, compassion-driven. The kind of organization whose entire brand rests on integrity. Daniel's attorney sent a formal complaint to the board of directors. Attached were messages in which Emily had actually joked about chemotherapy doing the hard part for them. Within a week, she was terminated, not quietly. The organization released a public statement citing ethics violations. Her professional reputation, in a sector built entirely on public trust, evaporated overnight. Criminal charges followed. Mark was indicted on fraud and embezzlement charges. Emily faced charges related to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Plea agreements were negotiated. Restitution was ordered. Assets were seized. The $120,000 they had taken was recovered. With interest, Daniel did not have to destroy them. They had already built their own destruction. Carefully, in writing, with heart emojis, he simply turned on the light. A year later, Daniel stood in the same kitchen where he had sat and read those screenshots, stronger, his hair growing back, soft and new the way things are when they return after surviving something, scars visible, but healing. The house was still his. The savings were substantially restored through the restitution order. The consulting business, which had idled during his illness, was beginning to move again. Mark was working hourly labor under court supervision, his company gone, his reputation in the industry finished. Emily had relocated to another state, alone. The professional network she had spent years building had largely evaporated with the public ethics violation. She was starting over, in the quiet, diminished way of someone who made a catastrophic calculation and lost. Daniel never sought what he pursued out of rage. He sought it out of clarity. He sought it because when someone reads your medical updates and responds with financial calculations about your house's market value, they do not deserve your silence, they deserve consequences. Here is the part that divides people. Some say he went too far, that he should have taken the financial restitution and moved on. Forgiven, let it go, let karma handle it. But here is what those people forget. Karma often needs evidence, and Daniel provided it. Meticulously, calmly, without rage or drama or a single unnecessary word. He did not embellish. He did not manufacture. He simply documented what already existed and placed it where it could not be ignored. He didn't destroy them, he exposed them. And sometimes, in a world that asks betrayed people to be gracious, exposure is the most devastating and most just force available. Today, Daniel volunteers at the oncology ward where he once received treatment. He sits beside newly diagnosed patients, people who are where he was, absorbing the word cancer for the first time, trying to locate something solid in a world that has suddenly become very uncertain. He tells them something simple, something he means with everything in him. You are stronger than you think. You deserve better than anyone who treats your illness like an opportunity. And whatever comes next, you will handle it, because you are still here. He is dating again. Slowly and carefully, with the particular intentionality of a man who now understands the full value of what he is offering, and the full cost of offering it to the wrong person. His circle is smaller, but it is deeper because surviving cancer changes you. It removes the tolerance for anything that isn't real. And surviving betrayal during cancer, that forges you into something that cannot be broken by ordinary things. Also, let me ask you something. If you discovered, while you were at your most vulnerable, your most diminished, your most desperate, that the two people you trusted most were not praying for your recovery, but planning your replacement, would you walk away quietly? Would you forgive and move on and trust that the universe would balance things eventually? Or would you do what Daniel did? Make sure they never benefited from your suffering. Make sure that every message, every transfer, every laughing conversation about your possible death was placed in front of the people who needed to see it. Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand, because this story divides people in the most fascinating and revealing ways. Some call what Daniel did revenge, others call it justice, and some, the ones who have been where he was, call it something else entirely. They call it survival. If this story moved you, if it made your blood boil or your heart ache or filled you with something fierce and protective toward the people in your life who are truly loyal, like this video, subscribe, share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that betrayal is not the end of the story. Share it with someone who needs to know that the people who underestimated them made the last mistake they'll make with him. And remember this, never underestimate someone who has already faced death and decided to live. I will see you in the next story. Don't be late.